William Black spent years working on regulatory policy and fraud prevention as the executive director for the Institute for Fraud Prevention. Now, Black also served as litigation director for the Federal Home Loan Bank Board and developed the very concept of control fraud. He's an expert on white-collar crime and public finance and joins me now to discuss what he knows best: banksters, bailouts, and control fraud. Welcome, Mr. Black. How are you today?
I'm fine. Good to be here.
Now, Mr. Black, can you please start off by explaining what exactly control fraud is and how it works?
Control fraud occurs when the people, most typically the CEO, that control a seemingly legitimate entity, use it as a weapon to defraud. So think in the American context, Enron, WorldCom, places like that, or if you have people that are older, they'll remember the savings and loan crisis and Charles Keating at Lincoln Savings.
Oh, older, that scares me when you say saving and loan is older. That was only the 80s. So, yeah, I'll move right along from there.
I'm a university professor. I deal with 18-year-olds.
There you go, there you go. That's much better.
What crisis?
Now, would you say that if in the financial sphere, accounting itself, that's the weapon that one must use in order to engage in control fraud, or are there other methods for employing control fraud?
Though there are many other methods, but in finance, the weapon of choice is accounting. So that's, again, that's the story of Enron and WorldCom and the savings and loan crisis and the current crisis. All of these were driven by epidemics of accounting fraud. And in the current crisis, you actually, to your point, you saw three different epidemics, each of which individually would have been the most destructive financial fraud epidemic in world history, but they all occurred simultaneously in the United States, and variants occurred in many other countries. So we had two epidemics of fraud in the mortgage loan origination process. That means the making of the loans. One was appraisal fraud, and the second was liar's loans. These were both driven by the lenders. And then, of course, there's no fraud exorcist. So once you've created these literally millions of fraudulent loans, we're talking over 2 million fraudulent loans annually by 2006, if you're going to sell them to the secondary market, and most of them were sold to the secondary market, of course, you can't say, hi, I want to sell you a fraudulent loan. So when you make your representations and warranties as part of your sale, those have to be false as well, or to go sort of biblical, fraud begets fraud.
Now, control fraud, that's your term. You coined it, it's yours all the way, and you just mentioned some other countries using this as well. Now, knowing what we know about control fraud, isn't this kind of the mantra of pretty much every emerging market in which to become developed?
Yeah, it is a major problem in developing markets. And again, it comes back to the point about accounting being the weapon of choice. And so you often have exceptionally weak securities regulation and virtually no real accounting rules. And so, for example, new enterprises, new IPOs, initial public offerings involving Chinese companies, years later when they try to register on the New York Stock Exchange, there have been enormous problems where it turns out that for years they've been filing false financial statements. So yes, there are entire countries, by the way, we've been talking in the private sector, but these control frauds occur in NGOs, but they also occur in government. Indeed, sort of the ultimate in control frauds is the kleptocracy, where the head of state is looting the country. And of course, in those circumstances, like Equatorial Guinea and Africa and such, you have this phenomenal oil wealth, phenomenally rich elites, and desperately poor nations.
Now, is there any way to emerge into a developed financial nation without going through some form of control fraud? Because from the way you see it historically, it seems the answer might be no. Do you have any other ideas?
No, I don't think that. I think you're quite correct that there is a control fraud to some extent is going to be inevitable in that transition period. My point is it isn't just transition, it's become sufficiently large that it causes these financial crises in places like the United States, which is nobody considers it a developing nation. You know, it's long past that status. Just to give you numbers again, by 2006, more than 40% of all the mortgage loans were what the industry called liar's loans, and the industry reported that the incidence of fraud in such loans was 90%.
Wow.
And appraisal fraud surveys showed that 90% of appraisers were subjected to extortion to inflate an appraisal. If you think about that, no honest lender would ever want to inflate the appraisal because that's the protection against loss. And the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission report found that the due diligence entity that did these reviewed these secondary market sales found that in 46% of the cases, the reps and warranties were false.
Wow.
You know, imagine dealing with a merchant that 46% of the time when you tried to buy an apple, they didn't give you an apple.
It's kind of unbelievable. Now, we only have 30 seconds left, but I want to quickly ask you, totally changing gears, how do you feel about quantitative easing, and do you think that the Fed is experiencing diminished returns with its ongoing QE program? Is this fraud?
It's not fraud, but it probably has very little effect, and to the extent it has much of any effect by reducing income, by reducing interest rates, it is actually probably a slight drag on the recovery. But mostly it's no big deal.
All right. Thank you so much, William Black. We appreciate your time, and I'm sorry we don't have more of it with you, but please come back very soon. That was William Black, Associate Professor of Law and Economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and author of The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One.